Most men are waiting for something that almost never happens. They expect a clear signal, a direct statement, something obvious that removes all doubt and tells them exactly where they stand. They believe that if a woman is interested on a deeper level, she'll say something that makes it undeniable. But real attraction rarely works that way. In most cases, she doesn't say it directly. She doesn't spell it out. She doesn't make it obvious in the way most men are hoping for. Instead, what happens is much more subtle. Her words shift slightly. Her tone changes. The way she interacts with you becomes different from how she interacts with everyone else. And if you're only listening for something direct, you'll miss it completely. Because what she's actually communicating isn't in what she says on the surface. It's in how she says it, when she says it, and what's happening around those words. This is where most men get confused. They're focused on clarity, while attraction often exists in ambiguity. They're waiting for certainty, while desire tends to move quietly. And by the time they realize something was there, the moment has already passed. That's why understanding this matters. Not so you can force anything, not so you can try to control the situation, but so you can recognize when something is naturally developing instead of second-guessing it or missing it entirely. Because when a woman feels a certain level of comfort, curiosity, and emotional openness around you, she doesn't announce it. She reveals it in small ways that, on their own, might seem insignificant. But together, they create a pattern. And once you start seeing that pattern, everything becomes clearer. The first thing you'll notice is that she begins to extend time. She might say something like, "You can stay a little longer." On the surface, it sounds simple, almost casual, but the meaning behind it carries more weight than most men realize. Time is one of the clearest indicators of interest. People naturally move away from what they don't enjoy, and they lean toward what feels good. So when she creates reasons for the interaction to continue, when she stretches the moment instead of letting it end naturally, she's showing you something without saying it directly. She doesn't want the interaction to stop, and that matters. Because most social interactions follow a natural rhythm. They start, they build slightly, and then they fade. But when that rhythm is disrupted, when she actively keeps it going, it means the experience feels different to her. There's something about the interaction she doesn't want to lose yet, and that's where you need to pay attention. Not just to the words themselves, but to the intention behind them. The second shift is even more direct, but still often misunderstood. She might say, "I feel really comfortable around you." Now, most men hear this and interpret it in a surface-level way. They think it means she enjoys their company, that she feels relaxed, that things are going well. And while that's true, it doesn't fully capture what's actually happening. Comfort at this level isn't just about being relaxed. It's about emotional safety. It's the absence of tension, the absence of pressure, the absence of that underlying feeling that something needs to happen. When a woman reaches this point, it means she's no longer analyzing every detail of the interaction. She's no longer holding herself back in the same way. She's present. And presence changes everything. Because when someone feels emotionally safe, they begin to open up naturally. Their tone softens. Their body language becomes more relaxed. Their attention becomes more focused on the moment, rather than on how they're being perceived. And in that state, attraction can develop without resistance. That's why this phrase matters. It's not just about comfort. It's about the removal of barriers. The third thing she might say is something that sounds almost subtle, but carries a deeper meaning if you understand it correctly. It's different with you. Now this is where comparison enters the picture. When she says something like this, she's not just describing the moment. She's placing you in contrast with other experiences she's had, other conversations, other interactions, other men. And what she's telling you, without saying it directly, is that you don't feel the same. There's something about the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you respond, that stands apart from what she's used to. And that difference creates curiosity, because when something feels familiar, it's easy to move on from it. But when something feels different, the mind stays on it longer. It tries to understand it. It revisits it later. It becomes something that lingers. That's where attraction starts to deepen, not because of intensity, but because of distinction. And here's the important part. That distinction isn't created by trying to be different. It's created by being present in a way most people aren't, by not rushing, by not forcing, by not trying to perform. And when that presence is felt, she recognizes it, even if she doesn't fully articulate it. The fourth phrase is where things become even more revealing. She might say something like, "I don't usually do this," and what follows that sentence can vary. It might be something small, something simple, but the phrase itself is what matters. Because what she's doing in that moment is acknowledging a shift in her own behavior. She's aware that she's stepping slightly outside of her usual pattern, that she's responding differently than she normally would. And instead of hiding that, she's expressing it, even if only partially. This is important, because people don't point out their own changes unless those changes feel significant. And when she says something like this, it means the interaction has moved beyond neutral territory. Something has changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but enough for her to notice it. And when someone becomes aware of their own shift, it often means they're already leaning into it. That's where you need to stay grounded, because this isn't the moment to push. It's the moment to maintain the same calm presence that allowed things to develop in the first place. The fifth signal is the one most men completely overlook, because it doesn't always come in the form of words. In fact, sometimes nothing is said at all, and that's exactly why it matters. There's a moment in certain interactions where the energy shifts, the conversation slows down. The need to constantly speak disappears. Eye contact becomes a little longer, a little more steady. Movements become more relaxed, less guarded. And instead of filling the space with words, she becomes comfortable sitting in that silence with you. Now, for most men, silence feels uncomfortable. They rush to break it. They start talking again, asking questions, trying to keep the interaction alive through words, because they assume that if the conversation stops, the connection is fading. But in reality, sometimes the opposite is happening. Sometimes that silence is the connection. Because when someone is comfortable being quiet with you, it means they're no longer relying on conversation to maintain the interaction. They're present in the moment itself. They're engaged without needing constant stimulation, and that kind of presence creates a different level of closeness. It's no longer about exchanging information, it's about sharing space. And when a woman reaches that point with you, when she feels at ease without needing to speak, when her attention stays on you without distraction, when the energy between you becomes slower and more focused, it's often a sign that something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly, if you know what to look for. This is where everything begins to come together, because none of these signals exist in isolation. One phrase on its own doesn't necessarily mean anything. One moment by itself can be misinterpreted. But when these patterns begin to appear together, when she extends time, expresses comfort, highlights that you feel different, acknowledges her own shift, and then settles into a more present, quieter energy, the message becomes much clearer. Not through direct words, but through the experience she's having with you. And that's the key. Attraction isn't usually communicated through clear statements. It's communicated through patterns of behavior and subtle shifts in energy, through the way someone stays instead of leaving, through the way they open instead of holding back, through the way they become more present instead of more distracted. And when you understand that, you stop waiting for something obvious. You stop looking for a single moment that confirms everything. Instead, you start observing the flow of the interaction as a whole. You begin to notice how it evolves over time, because that's where the real information is. Now here's where most men make a mistake. Once they start noticing these signals, they try to act on them too quickly. They assume that recognition means it's time to push forward, to change the pace, to take control of the direction. But that's not what created the connection in the first place. The connection developed because there was no pressure, because there was no urgency, because everything was allowed to unfold naturally. And the moment you introduce pressure into that space, the dynamic can shift just as quickly as it developed. That's why awareness matters more than action. Recognizing what's happening is important, but responding to it with the same calm, grounded presence is what keeps it intact. Because the truth is, you're not trying to force an outcome. You're allowing something to continue. And when that approach is consistent, something interesting happens. She begins to move toward you on her own, not because she's being led there, but because the experience feels right to her, because the interaction feels different from what she's used to, because there's no pressure telling her what to do. There's just a sense of comfort guiding her naturally, and that's where attraction becomes real. Not something that needs to be managed, not something that needs to be controlled, but something that develops because the environment allows it to. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's this. Don't wait for her to say something obvious. Don't expect clear declarations. Don't assume that attraction will always be direct. Instead, pay attention to the subtle shifts. The way she speaks, the way she stays, the way she opens up, the way the energy between you changes over time, because those details will tell you far more than any single sentence ever could. And when you learn to recognize those patterns, you stop second-guessing yourself. You stop wondering where you stand. You stop missing moments that were there all along, not because you forced anything, but because you understood what was already happening. And that understanding is what sets certain men apart. Not louder, not more aggressive, not more impressive, but more aware. And in the end, that awareness is what allows something natural to develop into something meaningful without needing to be pushed at all. So now I'm curious, have you ever experienced a moment like this and only realized it later? Let me know below.